Though games are born from a wealth of brilliant concepts, the development process often necessitates difficult sacrifices. Visionary ideas are frequently shelved entirely to streamline the final product. Most of them never see the light of day, but others could one day resurface. Sea of Thieves is no different and had a lot of visionary ideas before launch that were later shelved to make way for other things. So here is just a few of them. The first one, and possibly the most discussed feature that never made it to Sea of Thieves, even in the most recent and infamous captaincy update, is a much anticipated change to Pirate Legend status. Before the release of Sea of Thieves, it was said that when reaching Pirate Legend, you would no longer spawn at an outpost, but instead the Legend's hideout. Well, not the actual one, but like a small private bubble Legend hideout, where you and your crew could get things sorted, ready for your adventures, talk to the Pirate Lord, pick up some quests, play some board games, and even check the map of the outside world, before boarding your ship and blasting out of a waterfall into the real world where you joined the rest of the player base. You can actually see these original intentions in the Pirate Legend hideout, and the dock ship here. That in essence is the embodiment of this idea, a great concept left to shrivel and rot and never given any love. Maybe one day we'll see this happen, but with all of the quality of life fixes this game has had, and this one never even being considered, even in the captaincy update, I very much doubt it. This ship always makes me feel a little bit sad, as it always reminds me of what could have been. Next up is a feature that, although I understand why it never made it to the game, I still think it would be cool to revisit it. The shroud, encompassing the map, was supposed to ebb and flow through a life cycle of each server, sometimes covering over islands or in some cases entire regions. The idea was to simply focus people into areas of the game and increase the saturation of encounters with other pirates, but I can see why this was discontinued. Imagine having a quest at Cannon Cove, for example, but you have to wait 2 hours for the shroud to sod off. Would have been a little sucky. However, the idea could work these days using the Shroud Breaker, which we see in the Shores of Gold Tall Tale, but then also increasing or introducing new shroud variations of loot, which you could gain by traveling to the shrouded islands using the Shroud Breaker. This would have then heavily saturated players going into the shroud, rather than its original intentions. It would add an extra level of adventure to your play session. Reutilized in a different way, I think this could actually be a very cool feature for Sea of Thieves. Much like the Shroud, another entity within the Sea of Thieves was supposed to ebb and flow, and this time it was the water itself. It was originally planned and somewhat tested to have a tidal force within the game. The sea level in Sea of Thieves was supposed to go through extreme periods of low tide and high tide at several different islands. The idea behind this was that some islands would have underwater areas that were inaccessible in high tide and could only be ransacked and completed in low tides. The level of the tide was a little more extreme than reality, and you can actually see lots of these locations in the game, such as the strange ancient structures at the unmarked island at N13, and several other locations like Cinder Islet. This would have been such an awesome feature to have in the game, but it would also have to come with a valid and lucrative reason to venture into these areas once the tide is down. So perhaps this might return in the future, who knows? We all know the 4 regions that now inhabit the Sea of Thieves: the Devil's Roar, the Ancient Isles, the Shores of Plenty, and this place. The Devil's Roar, although added later in the game's development, was meant to be accessible on the game's release. But there was also another area that was meant to be here, and over time we've seen quite a few of its assets recycled into the live builds content. This area was known as the Sea of 5 Winds, with great inspiration taken from period-specific East Asian waters. So we're talking things like junk vessels, mountainous islands, and cascading waterfalls. A lot of its early stylized art can be seen in the Sea of Thieves art book, and you'll probably notice a few of them being very similar to what we have now, which has been recycled into the various Eastern Winds cosmetics that are rolled off the factory floor. I presume this area was decided against due to the already massive size of the map, and of course the amount of ships inhabiting it. But it's a shame they decided against this and we got the wild instead, in my opinion. Would have loved to have seen Asian temples and huge mountainous islands. And lastly, and this is something the community requests on practically a daily cycle, a land-based crab boss was meant to make it to the game. In fact, a few cave paintings often hint toward them, but for whatever reason, we never saw Mr. Pincher make it to the game. That said though, out of all of the canned features, this one is most likely to make a return at some point, as it's a hugely requested feature. Unfortunately, no more information to give on this one. There was simply supposed to be a big crab, but instead we have to make do with this little guy instead. Although there are a lot of less exciting features that were meant to make it to release, which I'll probably save for another video, these are probably the most exciting ones I can think of. But there's your 5 things that never made it to Sea of Thieves. Thanks for watching folks, don't forget to like the video if you, well, liked it, and consider hitting the subscribe button. It's free for 3 days, so don't miss out on this exclusive offer. I'll speak to you all soon. Happy sailing!
Subscribe! Press the subscribe button! If you don't, a busload of kittens will die! Subscribe!